Hey guys, let's go ahead and get through the digestive tract. This is Digestive 1. So we're going to start with the gastrointestinal tract. Its jobs, its job is to break down large food molecules into something smaller that our cells can then use. So keep in mind that the digestive tract is going to break these polymers. If you remember, polymers are long chains of molecules. Break polymers into monomers. And the way that happens is through hydrolysis. I don't remember if we went through this with macromolecules, but hydrolysis is where you basically insert a water molecule between different polymers, and it forces the polymers to break apart into these smaller monomers. Okay. These polymers are going to include our macromolecules that we've discussed in the past, our carbs, proteins, and lipids. Notice nucleic acids are missing because that's not a food source. Okay, so let's look at ingestion. Ingestion is when you take in food. Okay, so if you ingest something, you're putting it into your body. Hence the in the ingestion, taking in food. Then we have digestion. Digestion is what happens after ingestion. After you ingest something, your body, your digestive tract is going to digest it. And so this then is the breakdown of the food that you ingested. There's two parts of digestion. We've got a mechanical part and a chemical part. The mechanical part, one of the main aspects of the mechanical part is just your teeth, as you are breaking food down into smaller pieces. So this happens before it even gets to your stomach. Okay. And then we have the chemical digestion, and this involves these different enzymes that we've talked about. The enzymes then are going to break the chemical bonds in the food. The chemical digestion is what we're looking at when we are talking about breaking polymers into monomers. Make sure you can see all of this. So anyway, the chemical digestion breaks the chemical bonds in the food. Okay? Okay. All right, so the food is obviously going to move along the digestive tract. It's going to move through it from the moment that you ingest something until the moment that you excrete it as waste. So we'll start with the movement of food. This happens through a process called peristalsis. The intestinal tract is lined with smooth muscle. And if you remember about smooth muscle, it means that we don't have control over it. The body has control over smooth muscle contraction and relaxation. So peristalsis is this kind of wave-like contraction of the smooth muscle, the waves being what actually pushes the food from higher up to lower down. As the smooth muscle kind of contracts around an area of food, which pushes it forward, and then it relaxes, and then it's going to contract again, and it's going to move it forward some more. So that's this Peristalsis. You know me, I gotta spell as I go. Okay. Then we have absorption. So absorption is pretty much what it sounds like. This is when the body absorbs the different nutrients from the food, which has just been broken down through mechanical and chemical digestion. So we've got those big polymers broken down into monomers, and so we're going to be able to absorb monomers, water, salt, vitamins. Okay, all of these things have different areas of the digestive tract where they're absorbed. But when absorption happens, these things are going to be absorbed through the epithelium or epithelium. That's how the absorption happens. Sorry guys, it's hard to try to get it close enough so that you can see, but also back far enough so you can see everything. So these are the pieces that we're kind of missing. Okay. Let me try to get this a little more centered. Oops. All right, let's try that. It's a little farther back. Let's see how it goes. Okay, and then we have the elimination process, and this is where the body rids itself of the waste that is left over from the foods or, the things that have been consumed. So anything that has not been digested, and this includes things like cellulose, which we've talked about before. Cellulose is like what you have, like if you're eating corn, that outside kind of slippery little sheath is made out of cellulose, and your body does not digest it. So that just passes straight through to the digestive system. So anything undigested or unabsorbed is discarded from the body. There's some types of nutrients and minerals and vitamins that are hard for the body to absorb. Some of them require a different type of supplement to be taken with it to help the absorption. So anything that hasn't been digested or absorbed, it's going to exit the body. Okay. So the image that's here is showing you not only the digestive tract, but also the different accessory organs. The accessory organs are obviously those organs that are going to assist with digestion, but aren't directly officially part of the digestive tract. So we're going to list those. I'm going to move that up a little bit, at least makes it easier for me to write. All right, so accessory organs are going to include things like the liver, the gallbladder, the pancreas, and these guys all have different functions as far as releasing different enzymes. So we're going to go into those. Most of them add secretions. In the form of enzymes. Okay. Leave that up for a second if you need to look at it. Okay. So let's go on to the digestive tract wall. We're going to kind of go through the different layers, if you will. Sure you can kind of see. All right, digestive tract. So we're going to start with the lumen. The lumen is the open area of the digestive tract. It's like the inside of a tube. And so when you talk about the lumen, that's what you're talking about. And you can refer to it when you're talking about blood vessels and a variety of different things in the body. So the lumen is this open area of the digestive tract. So this is where the food is actually moving. When it's moving through the tract, it's the inside of this tube. And all of the different enzymes are going to be secreted into this tube so that the food is being broken down chemically. Okay, so we've got several layers that we're going to talk about, which you can see in the image that's been pointed out for you. So we just talked about the lumen. Let's move on to talk about some of these layers. And by the way, this should say GI tract, not intestines. Because the intestines are part of the GI tract, but they're not the entire GI tract. So, let's talk about the mucosa. There's that lovely, lovely word, mucosa. This is the layer that's closest to the lumen, okay? So it's this innermost layer here. So innermost meaning it's the closest to the inside, to the lumen. This is made out of simple columnar epithelium. This is where the epithelium chapter is going to come back to haunt us. And the job of this layer, which you might guess by the name, is to secrete mucus. For the parts of our bodies that secrete this, sorry, I want to make sure you can see it. It's mostly for, lubrication, really. I mean, in order for the food to not get stuck, or even to prevent friction from taking place because of how much is rubbing past the inside of the lumen as the food is moving constantly through, then we're going to have this mucus secretion which prevents that. Okay, so then we have the, wait a second, I need to add. So let me, how do I want to do this? So I just told you some of the purposes, right? I'm going to put them as bullet points. this also helps to protect the stomach lining itself from the acids and enzymes that are used in digestion. So acids, of course, have a low pH. Okay. Now let's look at the submucosa. Sub means under or below, so obviously this is going to be the layer below that. So if this is the mucosa here that has these little villi extensions coming out of it, the submucosa is inside of this. Okay. It contains blood vessels and nerves. Obviously, the blood vessels are required both to nourish the digestive tract, but they're also there to absorb the nutrients that are coming from the food that's being broken down. Okay, so this is where that absorption takes place, is through here. The nerves obviously are required to keep the digestive tract in contact with the rest of the body and what's happening and if there's something wrong happening down there. So this is where these layers are found. All right, let me make sure you can see this. Okay, kind of use my finger to help me know if I can see my fingers, and I'm good. So the next layer is called the muscularis, and that is right here. And this is also what it sounds like. This is smooth muscle. However, it's interesting because you've got two layers of smooth muscle. So you've got this layer, and then you have this layer. And notice that the muscle is oriented different directions. So that top layer is horizontal, forgive me, and the bottom layer is vertical. And that's because this is where the peristalsis is going to happen, those wave-like contractions. And so the layers of smooth muscle are actually positioned perpendicular to each other. Again, this is where peristalsis comes from. And this causes peristalsis. Okay, moving along. Let's talk about some of the different organs involved in the digestive tract. So let's talk about the stomach. We'll start here. Make sure I can see. Yep, okay. So the stomach, interestingly enough, is like an extension of the esophagus. So the esophagus, as you know, is like what runs down your throat. And then that's going to expand into the stomach. There's a lot of different sphincters in the digestive tract, which help to prevent backflow of different, it helps prevent backflow of digested and partially digestive food. And there's a few of them along the different positions in the digestive tract. So the first one that we're going to come across is the esophageal sphincter. And this is the one that separates the esophagus from the stomach itself. You have probably heard about heartburn and perhaps have even experienced it when this sphincter is either open because the muscle is weak or there's so much food kind of or acid that's backed up in the stomach that it's pressing on the sphincter. That's what is going to cause heartburn. It's this movement of basically digestive enzymes and acids moving out through the esophageal sphincter and up into the esophagus. So if it's open at all, you're going to deal with heartburn. Okay, and then we have the next sphincter, which is the pyloric sphincter. I have no idea why that S is written so far away. It's like that. So the pyloric sphincter, and this is going to separate the stomach from the intestines. Okay, so here's another point where we don't want a backflow of food or of digestive material. So if we're looking at this, the esophageal sphincter is here, and then the pyloric sphincter is here. So notice how it kind of keeps the stomach in this nice little connected and yet separated bag, if you will. It's a sack before food moves out of it. So kind of cool. Let's look at some of the muscles that we have. In the stomach, we have something called an oblique layer of muscle in that muscularis layer. And let me go back to, we're looking at this again. Remember that this is the muscularis. And in the stomach, it specifically has something called an oblique layer on top of that. Okay. And this has a unique diagonal. Wow, guys, I'm just as bad at home. Oh no, there, diagonal. Okay, this has diagonal muscle. So we know that in the muscularis that we were looking at in the image I just showed you from the other page, those are perpendicular to each other, but in the stomach, this unique oblique layer runs diagonally. Okay, so now let's talk about the gastric pits. This is where we're going to have some gastric juice secreted, which is a mix of enzymes, and that's going to be released into the stomach. So first off, this is actually found in the mucosa layer. Remember that the mucosa layer is the one that is closest to the lumen, which is the inside of the stomach, and is going to secrete mucus. But in these gastric pits in the stomach, there's also gastric glands. And the glands actually are the pits themselves. So we've got the mucosa layer, and in the mucosa layer of the stomach, we have gastric pits. And these glands are going to secrete hydrochloric acid. So hydrochloric acid is usually abbreviated HCl. It's also going to secrete something else called pepsin. Pepsin is an enzyme that breaks down proteins. So remember I told you that first off, there's always different types of enzymes for every type of substrate that needs to be broken down. So pepsin specifically breaks down proteins. And then that breakdown of proteins is going to begin here in the stomach. And the gastric glands, this HCl, by the way, is what helps to kill bacteria that gets into the food or that otherwise somehow contaminates the digestive tract. Obviously, we've talked about in the past that you can get a bacterial infection that does cause severe illness. That's like what happens a lot of times with food poisoning. And then it's just sometimes the bacteria don't mind being in really acidic environments, and so they're perfectly fine there. And sometimes it's just such an overwhelming number that it kind of takes over and causes symptoms before they can be killed. Like the acidity isn't enough to kill them all off to prevent symptoms. All right, let's keep going. Now we're going to look at the small intestines. Talk a little bit more about what kind of gets absorbed here. Again, let me make sure that I can see. Okay. And can I see side to side? Yes. Okay. Small intestines. So most of the chemical digestion process happens in the small intestine. And then we're going to also have some extra enzymes from our accessory organs. The pancreas, in this case, is going to secrete some of those enzymes into the small intestine to aid in this chemical digestion. Okay. Oh yeah, and then the pancreas. Secretes. Okay, so guys, I had a question not too long ago about what secretion is exactly, because I use that word a lot. There's a lot of words that I think I may inadvertently use without explaining, and maybe you're already comfortable with them, but just in case there's somebody that isn't. Secretion really is when we're looking at something like that has kind of a fluid base to it. Like we talked about mucus and a bunch of different types of acids and enzymes. They are released by glands normally, or in this case by specialized accessory organs. And it's not so much that it's not like turning on a hose and having like liquid pour in. It's more that it kind of oozes out of the cells that are secreting it. So secretion is just kind of a release of a substance into another place. Okay, so when it comes to the pancreas and also the different types of chemicals that are used in the small intestines, I'm going to go over those. We've got amylase. Amylase is going to digest carbs. And this is an enzyme. Actually, those are both enzymes. See if you can see that far over though. You can. Okay. So the amylase is going to digest carbs, and trypsin is going to continue the digestion of protein. Remember that this digestion of protein started in the stomach with pepsin, and now we're going to have trypsin. Then we have sodium bicarbonate. Guys, do you remember the pH part from, I think it was module 1 that we had to like go over, and it was confusing. Remember we talked about neutralizing stomach acid? That's, again, where we're seeing the sodium bicarbonate. It helps to neutralize the HCl. So it takes it from being too acidic and helps to balance it to make it more neutral. It's a buffer. And again, remember HCl stands for hydrochloric acid. Okay, so again, remember that we're in the intestines here, but the stomach had all this HCl, which means that as it passes through the pyloric sphincter, it's as food is passing through the pyloric sphincter, it's mixed with this hydrochloric acid. So when it gets to the small intestines, that needs to be neutralized, and so you actually end up with a slightly basic pH in the small intestines. So the low acidity worked well in the stomach, but we're going to alter that when we get into the small intestines. This is just showing the digestion of carbs, proteins, and lipids or fats. I don't know what's not on here, but I'm going to circle this word if you can see it. This word is lipase. And this is the enzyme that digests lipids or fats. Okay. Remember that for most, although definitely not all, as you can see, remember that for most enzymes, ASE is how they're going to end. So lipase, amylase, pepsidase. Obviously, trypsin and pepsin don't follow that rule, but they are still enzymes. So let's come down here to absorption. We talked about this as far as knowing that this is through the submucosa. This is kind of where we're going to have the absorption of those nutrients, where they pass from inside the lumen and start moving into the blood vessels and into the tissues. So if you remember those little finger-like projections that I showed you, hang on, let's see if I can find it. Yep. In this one, remember all these little hair or finger-like projections that come out? These are those little villi and microvilli, and they increase surface area, which is fantastic because we need to get all the nutrients that we possibly can out of the food that's being digested. So we do that by increasing the surface area of the mucosa by having these villi and microvilli. Because if we have an increase, that was loud. If you have an increase in surface area, then that means you're going to have an increase in absorption. Guys, why is it that when somebody has a motorcycle, they feel like it needs to be the loudest thing that you can hear for like a 3-mile radius? It's not necessary to be like, hey, I have a motorcycle and it's going to be super loud. See, there it is. Super loud so that you all know I have a motorcycle. And I wasn't just talking to guys. I just meant all of you in general. I don't understand. Is it a guy thing? Like, for real? That you have to have a loud vehicle? This has nothing to do with digestion. But just like in class, I feel the need to make comments. All right, so moving on. There are these different enzymes that are contained within the lumen. Remember, that's the open part. But also within the membrane of the epithelium. And again, this is kind of just review from when we went over the different layers of tissue in the digestive tract. They're all part, that aid in digestion. I don't really know why this is here. There's really nothing to say. Okay, let me double check you can see everything. I think we're good. Okay. Last page on this one. We're going to talk about disorders of the digestive system. When you pursue your careers in medicine, you will be looking both at how an organ system, tissue, gland, whatever, how it properly functions, what it's supposed to do, and then you're going to study some of the pathology or some of the disorders or the diseases and how those things change the function of the organ or gland or system, and also what some of the classic symptoms are to help in diagnosis. So that's why we go over a lot of times disorders of. We do it with the cardiovascular system, we'll do it with this, we're going to do it with urinary, respiratory, and that's the purpose. Let me make sure again that we're lined up. Can I see my... Yep, okay. Disorders of the digestive system, lactose intolerance. Well, wait a second. Motorcycle guys gotta go down the street again. Okay, thank you for announcing that. Sorry. Lactose intolerance happens because the enzyme that breaks down the sugar, lactose, if you remember lactose is a disaccharide, the enzyme that breaks it down is not present or is not present in large enough quantities. So you basically have anything with lactose in it sitting there, breaking down slowly on its own. Remember that we talked about enzymes being essential because without them, it could be possible to starve to death with food in your stomach because there's nothing there helping that reaction to take place quickly enough to provide nutrients to your body. So in the case of lactose intolerance, especially in the really severe cases, that's kind of what you're dealing with. You're just waiting for it to start breaking down on its own. Because the lactase, which is the enzyme, there's that ASE again at the end, isn't present. Make sure when you're looking, by the way, guys, that you're noticing on some of these, like lactase, the beginning's the same. So you got to watch if you're looking at an A or an O. It's going to make a big difference. One is the enzyme and one's usually the substrate. So in this case, lactase is the enzyme and lactose is the substrate that it's going to bind to. All right, so when you have lactose just sitting in there trying to break down naturally on its own, it causes all kinds of seriously lovely symptoms. Gas, bloating, diarrhea, all lovely words. It sounds like a Pepto-Bismol commercial. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about why you need it. Because there's nothing more exciting than talking about diarrhea in class. All right, so this happens because the lactose, okay, the sugar, lactose, that's sitting in the lumen is going to attract water, okay? So if we think about what we know about hypertonic versus hypotonic environments, then obviously we've got cells that are looking, so to speak, at all this lactose sitting in there. And I'm like, dude, we got to break that up. We've got to balance out this system. There's way too much solute in there. We need to try to make it better. And so it does that by letting water flow out of the cells and into the lumen. And then you get a ton of water in there, more than you'd normally have. And this is what you end up with. Diarrhea. This happens via osmosis, passive transport, diffusion of water across a semi-permeable membrane, okay? So then we have the other lovely symptoms, gas and bloating. This happens because since there is naturally bacteria that's in your digestive tract, the bacteria starts to break down the lactose that's present. So the lactose isn't being broken down by the enzyme, so it's just sitting there. And because it's sitting there so long, we start to have bacteria who are taking it apart. And as they are breaking down this lactose, they release gases. Because bacteria are living organisms, and they also have waste that they excrete or side products that they excrete due to their own life processes. And so in this case, the buildup of gas from the bacteria is what causes the gas and the bloating. P.S. This is also what causes bloating, like the really kind of crazy bloating that can happen in some cadavers after death. For the same reason, the bacteria are breaking down the different proteins and things in the body, and they are releasing gases, which causes the body to bloat. That is also what can cause a body that has been laying at the bottom of a lake or an ocean or a river. That's what can initially and finally cause it to rise after a few days, is all this gas that's being caused by the bacteria that are breaking down the tissues. Okay. So, on the market, there's a bunch of different things that you can purchase over the counter that aid in the digestion of lactose, so in digestion of most dairy products, and it's going to contain lactase. You're supposed to take it usually, I think, before you eat to let it kind of become active in your system, and then you can eat your dairy product and it will help to break it up for you, rather than having all of the very unpleasant side effects that go with lactose intolerance. And again, lactate is not an enzyme, it's something that you can buy over the counter. And I think there's some other ones too. Okay, we already covered this lovely question of the day. Refer to right there if you want to look again. All right, now let's talk about celiac disease. I know that there are people who may feel that celiac disease isn't actually a disorder. It is, but it's actually an autoimmune disorder. So briefly, let me try to explain an autoimmune disorder. I think I've done it once before. Make sure I'm still in line. But basically, in an autoimmune disorder, something at some point in a person's life has taught the immune system that it needs to react. And that it needs to react a lot of times to its own cells, because again, all of our body cells, blood cells, everything has markers on it saying, hey, this belongs here, right? This is part of us. But in an autoimmune disease, those markers get overlooked and the immune system becomes overly aggressive in destroying something, destroying the body's own tissues, cells, joints, bone, all kinds of stuff. And there's different types of destruction based on the type of autoimmune disorder. In this case, what happens is people have a true gluten intolerance, not so much an allergy, and we use allergy a lot, but it's really kind of an intolerance. The gluten are going to attach to the intestinal wall, and in doing so, it triggers an immune response, like, hey, this doesn't belong here. And so the immune system becomes hyperactive in policing the presence of gluten. And so then, rather than necessarily attacking the gluten, it starts attacking the intestinal wall that the gluten is attached to. Okay, so the immune system is killing off the cells of the intestinal wall as a result of having gluten attached. It's kind of the same issue, or believed to be a very similar issue, as people that have Hashimoto's, which is an autoimmune disease, but instead of attacking the digestive tract, Hashimoto's attacks the thyroid. And so the same thing, I've heard, and I have not done my own personal research on this, but I have been told that gluten somewhat mimics the cell chemistry of the thyroid gland, and so the immune system becomes sensitive to the presence of gluten, recognizes it as something the body doesn't tolerate, and then begins attacking the thyroid gland because of a similar chemical composition. So kind of a biochemistry type thing. I believe the basis for that is correct, but I have yet to compare chemically those two things side by side. I'll have to do that and let you know what I find. But anyway, so celiac disease is an autoimmune disorder triggered by the presence of gluten, which is why people that have this do not eat anything with gluten in it. It's a very painful, limiting, cruddy disorder. You just kind of have all of these symptoms up here, plus some. Intestine. I can't spell intestinal. Okay, I'm going to sing about it. Gluten attaches to intestinal wall, which causes the immune system to attack the cell wall. Or I'm sorry, the intestinal wall. Okay. When it does this, obviously, it's going to cause damage to that mucosal layer, right? And it's going to cause damage to the microvilli, which are on the mucosal layer, which help with the absorption. So it gets to a point where the villi can't absorb anything, any proper nutrients anymore, because they're basically being taken apart by the immune system. Go away, little fly. How come wherever I teach, there's like these little flies? Okay. Finally, diverticulosis. Sometimes you'll hear people talk about having diverticulitis. Diverticulosis is more that kind of chronic condition that doesn't ever go away. So the small intestine begins to weaken. The wall of the small intestine begins to weaken. And as it does, it forms little pockets. Okay? Since the wall is weak, it's easy for it to kind of balloon out, okay, into these little pouches. The problem with these pockets is that they begin to collect food, which then allows bacteria to grow, and you get bad bacterial infections that need to be treated with antibiotics. And for a lot of people that struggle with diverticulosis, part of the small intestine that is the most effective, that has the most pockets, usually has to be cut out completely, surgically. They have to go in and remove it, which prevents that occurrence. It prevents it from happening again. So people usually try to deal with diverticulitis and diverticulosis by not eating certain foods, things like seeds, lettuces, stuff like that easily get shoved into these little pockets, and they become just a breeding ground for bacteria. And again, this is treated either by antibiotics, oops, it's a C and then an S, and usually eventually by surgery. Okay, so that's the end of digestion 1.